The America's Democrats podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to americasdemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. And we say hello to Charly Carter, Executive Director of the Democracy Initiative. Charly Carter, thank you so much for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the pleasure is certainly ours. Now, first, tell us a bit about the Democracy Initiative and the focus of your work.
Sure. The Democracy Initiative is a unique coalition. It was founded back in 2012. We have 75 partners representing 45 million people across the country. Our partner organizations come from every possible issue area. We have immigration rights, civil rights, workers' rights, climate. We have faith-based organizations. Everybody does work in their own issue area, but they came to the table around one important issue, and that is preserving our democracy and getting rid of the filibuster.
Now, okay, and so your organization, of course, is taking a very strong stand on the filibuster, which, as you stated in a recent press release, fix it or nix it. Before we get too far into that discussion, remind us how the filibuster came into being in the first place.
Sure. So first, I'll start with what the filibuster is. And it is a procedural rule in the Senate that allows as few as a single senator to block debate of a bill. It is nowhere written in the Constitution. A lot of people like to say, oh, our founding fathers, they wrote this into law because they wanted us to be considered. No, it came about quite by accident in 1807. The third thing is folks should know is that we call it the Jim Crow filibuster because prior to Reconstruction, the filibuster was never used in the Senate, even though the law came about many years before that. It was used by Southern senators to block legislation that was designed to give rights to recently freed slaves. And since that time, we have seen the filibuster used largely to frustrate voting rights, civil rights legislation.
In more recent history, we've seen the GOP use the filibuster 3 times this year. Is this an unusual number of times the filibuster has been used in such a short amount of time?
Sadly, yes. We've actually seen the filibuster used 4 times this year. And depending on how folks define filibuster, that it's quite possibly even more than that. We have seen it used 4 times on voting rights legislation, on the freedom to vote, and just last week on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which is an extension of the Voting Rights Act. And it put that in perspective in 2006. The Voting Rights Act was reauthorized unanimously. And there are 10 senators sitting now who voted for it in 2006 who did not vote for it this year. But we've also seen the filibuster used on something like the debt ceiling. For the first time in history, This year, we saw a minority threaten the good name and faith in the economy of the US by putting at risk our ability to pay our bills. That's just, I don't think our forefathers ever would have written into the law something that would give that kind of power to the Senate.
Not only did they not do it, but they probably would not have liked the idea if they knew that was going on.
Exactly. I mean, it's never been done in history, so that speaks volumes about where we are today.
Yeah. What has that meant for Americans to have so much legislation simply just blocked?
It means gridlock. When you talk to citizens around this country, the number one frustration that they have and the number one reason that they don't have faith in our Congress is gridlock. They think nothing can get done. And the filibuster is the single reason that nothing's getting done. That a single person can anonymously block legislation, or this mere threat of a filibuster can keep this legislation from being introduced in the first place.
We're speaking to Charly Carter, Executive Director of the Democracy Initiative, talking about the filibuster, fix it or nix it. And under the category of fix it, Charly, what kind of changes to the filibuster could perhaps mediate the crisis that we now face?
Certainly, there are definitely ways to fix it. We've seen that happen in recent years. In 2013, it was actually the DI's first win. We saw the Senate change the rules around presidential nominations. They said that it no longer required a supermajority to confirm a nominee; that a simple majority would suffice. That meant it went from 60 votes down to 51 votes. In fact, that's what most people think of when they think of democracy, is that it is a simple majority that rules. We saw the law change again after Merrick Garland was refused a vote for his presidential nomination. Senate changed the rules to say that judicial nominees only required a simple majority for confirmation. And we saw President Trump use that to push through, or we saw Senator McConnell use that to push through 3 Supreme Court nominees. We can do the same thing now. The Senate can decide that voting rights is of such importance to our democracy, of such importance to the people of this land, that it doesn't require a supermajority in order to pass legislation to protect voting rights. That it should only take a simple majority. Currently, there's a silent filibuster, which means that a senator can send an email to the majority leader indicating that he plans to filibuster, and there's no transparency. It just ends debate right there. So one of the fixes is to require what's called a standing filibuster or talking filibuster, which would mean the minority would have to stand in the well of the Senate and talk, hold the floor, and explain why it is that they don't want to end debate on the bill. We think of that as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, if folks remember that, having to stand up and articulate. The thing is that requires people to go on record. So that is absolutely another way of fixing the filibuster.
Mm-hmm. And under the category of nix it, what would the Biden administration and Democrats have to do to make that happen? Because that seems like a pretty tall hill to climb right now.
It's not that tall. it's not actually that tall a hill, because this is not a law. The filibuster is a rule in the Senate. It exists only in the Senate, nowhere else in the country. No other legislative body in the country uses the filibuster. It only requires 51 votes. And so it would require all of the Democrats and the vote of the Senate President, Vice President Kamala Harris, to vote to nix it.
And that's a problem, because there are 2 senators that are not going to go that route.
That is exactly the case. Right now, there are 2 senators that have, are stuck in this mindset that the filibuster creates opportunities for dialogue. But unfortunately, Jim, we haven't seen that work. Right now, as I said, a single senator can hold up legislation. Altogether, the Senate minority represent 18% of the American population, just 18%. If you represented 18%, but you could control everything that happened, would you ever willingly give up that power? And as I said earlier, there's an extremist element within the minority, the Senate minority, that is only gaining in power. And I don't see them coming to the table. They weren't willing to come to the table on something like the debt ceiling. I don't.
And a few years back, it was the Farm Bill, and it was these things that are just, they're automatic, that of course they're for everybody. It's not, it's mind-boggling. It really is mind-boggling to watch this happen. And here's the other thing, Charlie, there's no shortage of calls to take some kind of action on the filibuster. Why do you believe we're not seeing concrete action?
I think largely those 2 senators that you named, Senator Kirsten Sinema from Arizona and Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, are largely holding up the works. And there's an effort to, their constituents are actively lobbying them to change their position, to at least fix the filibuster. And I think we'll get change when, quite honestly, when everybody weighs in. I'm part of a group that every month since the summer been protesting and performing acts of civil disobedience outside the White House, because we believe that after 36 years in the Senate, 8 years as vice president, watching his agenda get frustrated by Republicans and this and the filibuster, that nobody knows better than President Joe Biden that the damage that this rule can do. And we're asking him to use everything in his toolbox, all the tools in his arsenal, to get these senators in line and to do some kind of reform to protect voting rights.
And then Senators Sinema and Manchin aside, Republican Senator Mitch Romney recently wrote an op-ed warning that eliminating the filibuster could actually work against Democrats should Republicans win both houses of Congress in the next election cycle. What's your response?
My response is there's nothing that keeps them from doing that now. It is a rule. They will not hesitate, they will not hesitate to change the rules if it means moving their agenda. We've already seen that. The other thing that I want to say is, again, there's an extremist wing within the Republican Party. They are only growing in influence. Any new folks elected to the Senate are likely going to be a part of that extremist wing. And they don't believe in preserving norms. They believe in breaking norms. And we've already seen those people in action. So I have no reason to believe that should Republicans win, they won't already, they won't immediately change the filibuster rule.
Just amazing. Well, your work is most appreciated. Charly Carter, Executive Director of the Democracy Initiative. And we're talking today about the filibuster, whether to fix it or nix it. I think everyone knows how we feel about this. Charly, we appreciate your time with us. Certainly appreciate the work that you're doing. Would love to hear back from you down the road.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the discussion, and I look forward to coming back on.
Thank you. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
We might expect that corporate billionaires and Koch-funded Republican right-wingers would be howl-at-the-moon opponents of a wealth tax, Medicare-for-All, and other big progressive ideas to help improve the circumstances of America's workaday majority. But Democrats? Unfortunately, yes. Not grassroots Dems, but a gaggle of don't-rock-the-corporate-boat fraidy-cat Democrats. These naysayers are the party's old-line pals, lobbyists, and other insider elites who are now screeching that Democratic candidates must back off those big proposals. Why? Because, they squawk, being so bold, so progressive, so democratic will scare voters. As one meekly put it, when you say Medicare for all, it's a risk. It makes people afraid. Excuse me, but in my speeches and writings, I say Medicare for all a lot. And far from cowering, people stand up and cheer. In fact, the New York Times has just reported that 81% of Democrats and 2/3 of independents support Medicare for all. Even apple pie doesn't score that high. It's simply a lie that the people are afraid of the idea of everyone getting public-financed health care. So who really fears it? 3 special interest groups: insurance company profiteers, big pharma price gougers, and the political insiders who are hooked on funding from these corporations. This is Jim Hightower saying, not only is it a pusillanimous fabrication to claim that the people oppose any changes stronger than corporate minimalism, it's also political folly. If the Democratic Party won't stand up for the transformative structural changes that America's middle and low-income majority clearly wants and needs, why would those people stand up for Democrats? As the 2016 presidential election taught us, a whole lot of the working-class Democrats the party counts on won't.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.
The first year anniversary of the Biden presidency, if you just look at the facts, Jonathan, as the White House is quick to point out, Vaccinations have increased from 20 million Americans to 210 million, 6 million new jobs, record growth, economy coming back. He got the stimulus package passed, the infrastructure passed, which, as you have pointed out, is more than LBJ and FDR got combined in new federal spending. So why isn't Joe Biden getting more credit for year number one?
I think there's a two-word answer: COVID, inflation. Yeah. And, so you had this expectation that Biden actually articulated that everything was going to be over by the 4th of July because they had this very, very successful vaccination campaign, which before the merchants of death on Fox and elsewhere pushed back and before you had people like Aaron Rodgers with blood on his hands, which we can get to, we were leading the world in the first half of last year in vaccinating our people. So there was this expectation that the combination of that and the fact they had already passed a huge COVID relief package in late February, and we're headed for, other legislative victories, that this good news would continue. Two things happened over the summer. One was that the Delta variant proved to be powerful enough that vaccination did not prevent you from spreading it. Mm-hmm. Even if you didn't get terribly sick if you'd been vaccinated, you could spread it. And this was a shock to the CDC in July, right, and a shock to the White House. So once that happened, and then you had a very bad month for Biden with the messy withdrawal from Afghanistan, suddenly he was thrown off balance, and his best laid plans were kind of in tatters going into the fall when Delta worsened, and then we got hit by the Omicron variant at the end of the year. So, he's been hit by these external events. I think if inflation had proved transitory the way Paul Krugman predicted, and he's admitted that he was wrong about that Biden wouldn't be in such bad shape. But you have the worst inflation in 40 years, and that's going to really put a damper on the economic good news.
Is part of the problem that we as Americans are too impatient, right? Or that our expectations are too high, particularly after 4 years of Donald Trump?
Yeah, I do think that's a bit of a problem. I don't think it's, and you hear this a lot in Washington, that, Biden, he was trying to be FDR and the American people reacted badly to his big ambitions. That's complete bull. Each element of these ambitious Build Back Better program and infrastructure plan, these are all very popular, as is voting rights. So it's partly an expectations game. It's partly the fact that he stacks up really well against Donald Trump, obviously, for Democrats and a number of independents, but he doesn't stack up that well against Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. So you have to remember who he's being compared to and where the expectations lie. So there was a kind of a funny bit that Bill Maher had on his show last week where, he said, well, why don't, Biden and Obama technically divorce their wives, and then Biden and Obama can gay marry, and Obama can become first lady, and instead of, having a weight control project the way Michelle Obama did, or bullying the way, amazingly enough, that was Melania Trump's issue. He can just run the federal government, and it sort of tapped into the fact that even though Democrats don't think Obama was perfect, he set a different standard. He was obviously much younger. And this is a point that my son makes, Bill, that I think is very important, that especially after Obama and Trump, the president has to be a performer of some kind.
Right.
They have to live inside American popular culture and connect to the public at a performative level. And while there was a time maybe when Joe Biden could do that and, he could drive his Mustang and put on the sunglasses or whatever.
Right.
He's really just too old to do that at this point. And so he's never going to, people respect him and I think they're comforted by him and they know he's a decent man. And his personal numbers, by the way, are still very high. Like people have a lot of affection for Joe Biden, but they're not going to think he's cool. And that's just not going to happen.
He doesn't have that jazz or that energy that I remember as a senator, right? Where he was fun and he was sort of a character. But I heard a phrase that you used on Morning Joe the other day, the Green Lantern theory, which resonated with me. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So this was first articulated by a political science professor named Brendan Nyan. And basically, everybody knows the Green Lantern, comics.
Comics, right.
Right. So the Green Lantern is a superhero. And the basic idea is that a lot of the American public, they think the president runs everything. Right. And that he can just wave a magic wand. When I was writing I wrote 2 books about Barack Obama, and one about Franklin Roosevelt. And I think he had this problem too. And at that time, the Obama White House called it the magic wand theory.
I remember.
And, that the public and a lot of people in Washington and in the press, they expect, the president can get this bill through. He's the president.
Yeah.
He can get this through. And they just kind of forget that, no, there's this co-equal branch of government called the Congress, and they have a lot of their own ideas, and they weren't sent there just to rubber stamp the president. And there's this other thing called the Federal Reserve, which actually has a hell of a lot more to do with the American economy than anything that the president does. And they're also independent, and their governors are appointed by the president, but they operate independently. So this does not tend to be a problem that afflicts Republican presidents because their base doesn't really want them to do things. They might want them to undo things like repeal Obamacare. They wanted Trump to do that, but it's much harder to do things. And this assumption, and this really afflicted Carter a lot too. He was the first, post-war president where he really felt this, where the press developed these unrealistic expectations. So in Jimmy Carter's case, I argued in my book, His Very Best, that he was made and unmade by Watergate expectations. So the only reason he was even elected president was because, he was coming after Nixon and Ford, and he ran as a healer, just like Joe Biden.
Right.
And so everybody, really wanted healing. So he got fantastic press when he was running for president, as he told me when I was in more than one interview about this. And then the minute he gets to the White House, as Jody Powell said, we not only didn't get a honeymoon, we didn't get a one-night stand. Well, why? Because of this Green Lantern theory. They expected that he was going to be able, he just gotten elected and that he was going to be able to get all this stuff done. So when he couldn't get his energy package through at first, even though he did eventually get most of it through, it was, why is Carter failing?
Right.
And then the same thing happened to Bill Clinton, who had a very rocky first year.
Mm-hmm.
And even though Obama had a more successful first year, by his second year, in advance of the disastrous 2010 midterms, he also had a Green Lantern problem. Like, why isn't Obama getting more done?
Right. Oh, no, I remember those days. Yeah. Well, I want to get more into the comparison between Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden, which you wrote about in the Washington Post last week. But one more question in terms of expectations. It seems that, in fact, I think Joe Biden admitted last week that his expectations of what he could get done with Republicans in the Senate were too high because this is a different brand of senator today. Here's President Biden from his news conference last week.
Did you ever think that one man out of office could intimidate an entire party? I've had 5 Republican senators who've told me that they agree with whatever I'm talking about for them to do. But Joe, if I do it, I'm going to defeat it in the primary.
It's a different gang of Republicans than he used to work with.
Yeah, it is. And they say something very different in public than they do in private. And it is the big story of 2021, I think historians will agree, is that even after January 6th, you still had this moral cowardice in the Republican Party. And that, this is the great character test of their lives. And with very, very few exceptions, they're failing that character test, which is to stand up to a would-be tyrant and do anything they can to make sure that he doesn't become president again and end American democracy. And the fact that they, to hold their job or not spend more in a bloody primary, that they would be so terrified of him is really depressing. But I do think that historians will also say that Biden was naive about the reality of today's Republican Party. And he should have understood that this party had been poisoned a long time ago. Obama had the same problem. I remember when I was working on my first Obama book, and I was talking to a congressman named George Miller.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Who insiders know is responsible for more health and education legislation than any other single legislator of the last 40 years.
Absolutely.
And he and Nancy Pelosi, his colleague from the California delegation, worked very closely with each other. He chaired a powerful committee in the House for many years. And so at the very beginning of the Obama administration, his first week, he goes over and he meets with the House Republicans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're in a crisis, the likes of which we hadn't seen since 1933 when Roosevelt took over, which is the subject of my first book, The First 100 Days of FDR. And at that time, the Republicans realized the country was in deep trouble, and they came together with Roosevelt. Now, within a few months, they started acting like the opposition again. But at the beginning, when we were in really deep trouble, they came together with Roosevelt. So Obama expected that the Republicans were going to do the same thing. And that when he introduced his rescue plan, that they would sign on the way they had in 1933. And they didn't, right? Instead, we found out later they went to a restaurant on the night of the Obama inauguration and plotted to do anything they could to destroy his presidency, which was a profoundly unpatriotic act. So at the time I was talking to George, he didn't know yet about this famous dinner at the restaurant. But what he said to me was, Obama doesn't get it. These people are never going to do anything to help him. And a lot of them, I hate to say it, this is George Miller, they're not good people. And they're not people of goodwill. They're not on the level. They don't tell the truth. He was talking about, the heirs to Newt Gingrich. Gingrich had been gone for a while by then, but, the implacable right-wingers in the House.
Right.
And who were, by that time, were already dominating the Republican caucus. And that then infected the Senate. And so what you have here is a poison weed in the form of the Republican Party. And Joe Biden just didn't get that.
If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.